Have you ever wondered what the difference is between ADHD and autism? Maybe you've heard people talk about them like they're completely separated, or maybe you notice that there are some traits that seem to overlap and are very, very similar. Is ADHD just about being hyperactive and distracted, while autism is about struggling with social interactions? Or is there more to it? And what happens if you are able to relate to both conditions? In today's video, we're gonna break down the key differences between ADHD and autism, where they overlap, and why so many people, especially adults, find themselves wondering, do you have ADHD, autism, or both? Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Yanina, cognitive psychologist, ADHD coach, and ADHDer myself. Whether you've been officially diagnosed or you're currently deep diving into the internet rabbit holes trying to figure out if ADHD might be part of your story, I've been there. Did you know that before 2013, doctors weren't allowed to diagnose someone with both ADHD and autism? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, which is basically our rule book for diagnosing psychological conditions, didn't allow a dual diagnosis until the 5th edition. So this means that if you were diagnosed before 2013, you may have only been labeled with one condition, whichever one seemed more obvious at that time. So as a result, many people who actually both have ADHD and autism, also often referred to AuDHD, were either misdiagnosed or never got the full support they needed. And AuDHD is actually way more common than you think. So let's look into the numbers. So for autism, that affects about 1 to 4% of the population, whereas for ADHD, that might be more on the 5 to 8% of children and around 2 to 6% of adults. But here's where it gets interesting. So studies suggest that up to 40% of people with ADHD also meet the criteria for autism. And if we include people who don't meet the full diagnostic criteria but still have significant traits, the overlap might be as high as 80%. So this means there is a huge number of people who may be walking around undiagnosed with AuDHD, only seeing parts of their struggle without realizing the full picture. So how do ADHD and autism interact? Let's break that down. So firstly, there are conflicting traits that pull you kind of into these opposite directions. So one of the most frustrating parts of having ADHD is that the two conditions can either contradict each other, and autism creates kind of that routine, predictability, and we want structure, versus for ADHDers, we thrive on novelty, excitement. So what happens when you have both? So you might need things to be very organized, but your ADHD makes it impossible to stay organized. Or you might hate change, but you also get very easily bored. You might hyperfixate on special interests, but you constantly change them like someone with ADHD would. You might be very overwhelmed by too much sensory input, but your ADHD brain also craves that stimulation. And this constant internal battle can be so exhausting, leaving you and your brain just feeling like it's constantly fighting itself. Also, for both ADHD and autism, that can make socializing very difficult, but for, again, very different reasons. So for someone with ADHD, you might be very impulsive in conversations, you might interrupt, overshare, or struggle to listen. Versus someone with autism, that can make it hard to understand certain social rules, you might miss certain cues, struggle with small talk, or feel like you don't quite fit in. Now with AuDHD, you might experience both at the same time. So sometimes you might talk too much, other times you withdraw completely, sometimes you're outgoing and friendly, other times your socializing feels very overwhelming. You might mask, forcing yourself to act normal, only to feel then completely drained afterwards. And if socializing feels like it's a constant guessing game, ADHD might be something to look into. Another thing that can be very hard to manage when you have ADHD and autism. Sensory issues can also be commonly associated with autism, but also it can play a role in someone with ADHD. So you might hate certain sounds, textures, or lights. That could be very typical for someone who is autistic. But for example, your ADHD brain might also seek out that intense music or spicy food, movement, anything that's more exciting and stimulating. And then you might switch between these sensory avoiding and sensory seeking activities depending on your mood. So for example, one day a loud concert feels very overstimulating and unbearable, and then the next day you're blasting music at full volume because your brain craves that stimulation. And this mix of sensory overload and sensory craving is definitely a big thing for someone with AuDHD. Another one is that for ADHD and autism, both can affect emotional regulation in different ways. So for someone with ADHD, that makes emotions very intense, fast moving, and you might go from calm to furious in seconds, versus for someone with autism, that makes emotions deep and overwhelming, leading to these shutdowns or meltdowns. And when you put them together and try to regulate your emotions, that can feel absolutely impossible. Studies have also shown that individuals with AuDHD are way more likely to experience anxiety, depression than just those with ADHD or autism alone, because it constantly feels like you're split between these two disorders, and your body, your brain wants and seeks these very two different things. ADHD is also well known for causing executive dysfunction, but when you add autism into that mix, things can get even more complicated. So for someone with ADHD, it makes it hard to start tasks because of distraction or just procrastination, versus for autism, that can make it hard to switch between tasks because of rigidity. And together, that can lead to just extreme procrastination, feeling mentally paralyzed when you're trying to start something new, or you might feel very burned out from that constant mental load. Living with AuDHD can just be mentally exhausting because you're constantly battling all these contradictions, the structure versus novelty, stimulation versus overwhelm, and you might be masking your symptoms all day to fit into society and the people around you. And you might be experiencing constant burnout just trying to keep up with everything. So if you're feeling constantly drained, this might be a reason why. If you were able to identify with the things that I just talked about, here are some steps that you can take next. So first important step would be to seek an evaluation from a psychologist or a psychiatrist who is ideally informed in the topic of ADHD and autism. As a second step, you can educate yourself. So just learning more about AuDHD can help you just get a better understanding of your experiences and to better understand why certain things are just so hard for you. Another important step could be to find community, and connecting with other people who share similar struggles can be so life-changing, and that can build such a bond and way more confidence, because you're seeing that you're not the only one who's going through that. You can share tips and strategies to also support each other. As a next step, you can also explore different treatment options. So for example, medication, therapy, sensory accommodations, lifestyle changes, coaching, because that can also help you to manage your symptoms and understand yourself better. And if you're able to understand that you might have AuDHD, that can be such a huge relief, because you're not just autistic, you're not just an ADHDer, you are requiring your unique mix of treatment and lifestyle changes and approach to life and your to-dos, your tasks. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update or a new video. Thank you so much for your support. And let me know in the comments, do these signs resonate with you? Do you see yourself more on the ADHD side, or the autism side, or the AuDHD side? Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next week in the next video. Bye.